So let's kind of talk about some other teams that maybe are disappointing. We could talk a little bit more about LA here too, because I feel like they kind of are lumped into this category too. The two best teams in the NHL this year, the Winnipeg Jets, the Washington Capitals, they didn't really do all that much. The Jets went out, they got Luke Schenn, they got Brandon Tanev, and Capitals got Bolivier. Do you feel confident that these two teams are even going to be able to make any sort of run after the deadline? Do you feel like their stock is at an all-time low now? How do you guys feel about them, and how's your confidence in these two teams after the deadline?
I mean, look at both. I said this. I remember we actually had a conversation because it was Zach's podcast. We were talking about what do the Washington Capitals really need to add? Like, what could be this difference? And I just said it was depth. Like, I liked their defense. I liked what their forward core looked like. And there are questions in net because of experience specifically with Logan Thompson. However, you have to remember, it's not like he didn't play any games when he was with Vegas. Like, he did play games when he was there. So the experience is kind of there. But at the same time, it's a new team. This is 1 year. Maybe they boost it. Maybe they don't. I feel like it's either like it's an absolute bust or it's a hit with this team when it comes to playoffs because you just don't know, especially now with all these teams adding. But then we go to the Winnipeg Jets and we say they need a second line center. They need a second line center. They didn't do anything. And I'm saying, why not take a little bit of a flyer, like a Casey Middlestat? I don't know. I was getting a little bit interested with that. You go and get a guy, Luke Schenn, who I will say, I'll stand up for my man right now. People were ripping on this trade. A second and fourth, it's a little pricey. Don't get me wrong. But having Luke Schenn on your team, he is a stand-up guy. He does his job extremely well and will provide solid depth for them. Now, Brandon Tanev, he's not that second line center. He'll be fine depth. But this is the difference where I think there was between Washington and Winnipeg. Is that the Washington Capitals, good for them. They kind of had all their pieces already. Like, the depth was really the only thing that you could have improved. A second for Beauvillier was interesting, to say the least. But that's all I needed. For Winnipeg, they're good. And they have chemistry, but they needed a little bit more. And unfortunately, they just didn't really go out and get it. So I think the biggest difference between Winnipeg now kind of maybe falling out of the hearts and minds of everyone, even though they still want them to win, for the Cup specifically, you probably lean more Washington because they have all the pieces there. They have the guys there. And they've also had people on that team who've done it before. I think the only question is, will those younger guys and Protas and McMichael and everyone, will they be able to step up? But, that would be my only question.
Yeah, I love Washington going into the playoffs, and I felt like they didn't need to do too much. And if you were Washington and you went out and got a Besser or you got a Nelson, or maybe you end up trading for a Cow, who's still on the Penguins, by the way, maybe that ruins the team chemistry a little bit. You have that top six, which on paper, it doesn't stand out. But they just get the job done, and their goaltending is honestly some of the best in the league, and you didn't need to do anything on a blue line. You added Beauvillier for that second, which I thought was okay if you're Washington. And going over to Winnipeg, they have the star power compared to Washington with Connor, Scheifele, Morrissey, Connor Hellebuck. But again, my question going into the playoffs is their depth in their blue line going to hold up against a team like Colorado or Dallas or Vegas, Edmonton? And then is Connor Hellebuck going to completely shit the bed, or is he going to play just above average? He doesn't even need to be a historic level pace that he's on right now. Just give me a 9-10 save percentage and then 2.6 goals against average, and I think this team ends up in the Western Conference Finals. Now, again, I said that going into last season, too, into the playoffs, and he was atrocious in the playoffs. Now, granted, the defense in front of him was absolutely abysmal as well, so I will give him a benefit of the doubt. But, those are my two X factors. I think they'll be able to score enough come the playoffs against any goaltender that they face. But again, defense and goaltending is my X factor.
Yeah, you actually brought up a point here. The Jets' defense is the same as last year, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't do anything at the deadline. So I think I'm a little bit more disappointed in Winnipeg. One, because the people in their division who they will likely be playing in the first round are, to me, on paper, 10 times better than them now. Also, you didn't fix your defense. You just added depth guys. You didn't address your second-line center position. To me, it just seems like the Jets are kind of showing that they're a regular season team again. And they didn't do that one move that could have maybe made you feel a little bit better about it. Granted, maybe last year was just a bad playoff run for them. Maybe their defense, maybe they didn't have good experience there, whatever it was. But I will say I'm a little bit more confident in the Capitals not making any moves based on what we've seen from them throughout their entire lineup. But it does kind of scare me too from that side because Florida got way better, Toronto got way better, Tampa Bay got a lot better, which people aren't talking about because it was a couple days before the trade deadline. I'm not too comfortable with either of those teams going in, and I think that they're more in Edmonton's position now than they are in those top contender positions now, if I had to kind of categorize them. Do you guys feel like that's a little more accurate, or do you still consider them those upper echelons?
Like for Winnipeg specifically, or just both teams?
Both.
I mean, like, I will say, Zach, you had a good point. I meant to mention Connor Hellebuyck there. Like, if you're going to get Connor Hellebuyck, who's playing in the regular season right now, then, I mean, frig, show me the door, man. I mean, like, you know, I'll be happy to eat it there. But, you know, you make a good point. Like, with how all these other teams added, like, you know, I have a Winnipeg friend. He loves the Jets, and you look at it and you say, okay, Dallas adds Rantanen. They're already extremely deep. Maybe that right side of the defense is tough, but they're already very deep. Colorado adds big time throughout many weeks, right? And like you look at these other teams in the West, yeah, it's tough. Washington, on the other hand, they're already pretty good, and they've been dominating that Metro. They're not going to give up that top spot. But, you know, you look at them and you say, it's a little bit easier, but it's harder now for them. Like, easier to say, for example, that, okay, I think they could do something, but harder for the actual team to be able to get through it now. Because if you're not having those ads, like you mentioned in Tampa, who goes out and gets Yanni Gordigan, who is extremely impactful. Like, I think people forget. He's older, but I think people forget. And then Bjorkstrand, which they needed a top 6 winger. Like, this is something you need to look out for with Florida, with Tampa, with Toronto, with even, who knows? Like, I mean, who else in the Metro is going to do something? But yeah, no, I think you're hitting on the top there.
Yeah, I guess you could look at Washington too and be like, the Metro's not going to be competitive for them, with New Jersey kind of having all the injuries, and now Carolina losing Rantanen, so maybe there's a bright spot for them, but Winnipeg's kind of on my concern list, I guess. And now we can kind of do a quick one for this one, because I feel like, Zach, you and I talked about it a little bit before we hopped on. Kind of the biggest hockey trade of the day, Buffalo and Ottawa. They basically exchanged, with a couple other pieces involved, Josh Norris for Dylan Cousins. If you had to just make a quick take on this, both of you guys, which team do you think won this trade if you had to pick one? So no riding the fence, you got to pick one here.
Say it. Say it.
Be a homer if you got it.
I want to say Buffalo because I've seen Dylan Cousins play. But I look at Ottawa, I'm like, they got the higher potential player. Dylan Cousins is a 75-point ceiling, to be honest with you. If he gets back to how he played in 22-23, Ottawa wins this trade no matter what. I think I'm like neutral on it, genuinely. I think both teams made out at like a B-, C+ type of deal. This is a trade where I want to wait. And then next season, I want to see how both players play out. Question mark being is, can Norris stay on the ice and produce? Because when he is on the ice, he produces well. The Sabres' power play struggled. He's a power play guy. Even strength game for Ottawa has been really, really bad. Dylan Cousins, most of his production comes from even strength. So if Cousins can even get up to a 55-point pace, Norris can stay healthy, win-win in my book.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you look at it right now, how much did Norris mean to that lineup is, like, you saw Brady Tkachuk crying. So Cousins is already going through a pretty tough situation here. If he can produce, then the Ottawa fans are going to love this man, and it looks great because Norris has injuries. He's on a more lucrative contract, and, you know, I mean, Steve Staios is going to have this is like his biggest bet probably as a GM so far for that team. So, and then when you look at the other side, I mean, I like Bernard Docker. I think that ceiling is probably a top 4 defenseman. I think he's a good depth piece. And then for Norris, yeah, I mean, you want to make a big move. It's a big move. But I think Zach makes a good point. If you're going to do something, wait a bit. However, I'm very interested to see how Dylan Cousins is down the stretch here, especially if you don't know, first time trying to go for the playoff spot. So I think that's going to be very cool.
Yeah, would love to see how he's going to fit there. I'd like that Ottawa didn't just stay pat and they did something to try to improve this team, because I really do want to see them in the playoffs this year. And with how things are shaking out, maybe a Battle of Ontario first round, boys. That would be pretty exciting.
If the Leafs lose that, dude, that would be the ultimate Leafs lose.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
so truly. This would probably be worse than, like, Habs series.
It would be degrading, man. It would be degrading for
like,
sure.
oh man, yeah.
So